Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Franchise Spotlight. In today's episode we're going to be talking about 1987's The Living Daylights. Let's go ahead and get this rolling. So, with Roger Moore now out of the picture as James Bond, Timothy Dalton does step into the role. This obviously being his first James Bond movie. He does only do 2, however, it's a much different take on Bond than what Roger Moore had. Like I said in the last episode, A View to a Kill, it seemed like they were headed into a darker route with James Bond. And Timothy Dalton picks up the pieces that were left of A View to a Kill, at least the darker tones of it, and definitely continues on that path of taking a much darker approach to James Bond. Because Roger Moore's movies were much more campy and much more wholesome, if you will, as far as like the feel of them go. And Timothy Dalton really just, it's not necessarily him, it's the way he portrays the people who make the movie. Ultimately, they want to take a different route with James Bond and they make him darker. Starting off the movie in the cold open, they are doing this exercise, all the 00 agents are, and someone is there killing the 00 agents. James Bond tries to catch him, obviously eliminates him, and as he eliminates him by jumping off of a cliff from a moving car, he parachutes down from the cliff onto a boat, probably making the greatest Bond entrance that we've seen so far, in my opinion, where a woman is on a boat speaking on the phone and she goes, "I just really need a real man." And you know who enters scene? James Bond.
It's all so boring here, Margot. There's nothing but playboys and tennis pros. If only I could find a real man.
I need to use your phone. Should call you back.
Who are you?
Bond, James Bond. Exercise Control 007 here. I'll report in an hour.
Won't you join me?
Better make that 2.
Probably one of the coolest entrances thus far as a James Bond role goes. I feel like this movie had a really convoluted plot and where a KGB diplomat wanted to defect away from the Soviet Union to gain the trust of the East, and then went back to the KGB with information and intel, and then had James Bond try to kill someone from the KGB, trying to frame them. There's a lot that happened in this movie. One thing that I did notice early on in this film that felt different than the other Bond films is that it seemed like that they wanted to focus more on the storytelling aspect of it and the action rather than his love life. But ultimately, I am happy with the decision. If it's not necessary, why have it in the movie? And I don't feel like James Bond needs to sleep with everyone that he sees. So good on them for making this movie more about story. You know, so we love a movie with story in it. One thing I also noticed early on is that Timothy Dalton doesn't really have a lot of comedic one-liners as, say, Sean Connery or Roger Moore had before him. Yes, he does have like little one-liner quips in there, here and there, but it doesn't feel as consistent as the other ones, and maybe it is because they do want to take it on the more darker route, which I can respect that, because they don't want to keep doing the same, not necessarily mundane, run-of-the-mill James Bond stuff, so they wanted to change it, which, you know, I really respect them for wanting to do that change and get away from the campy side of it and make it more realistic, if you will. So not only do they replace Roger Moore with Timothy Dalton as Bond, but they actually do replace Moneypenny, who was previously played by Lois Maxwell, and now she's played by a younger actress named Caroline Bliss. She does have a very small role in this, maybe it's just to get her feet wet as Moneypenny, but then again, Moneypenny never really did have a big role before. She was just kind of like someone James Bond flirted with back and forth, and someone who provided intel when necessary. So I guess we'll see more of her in the next movie, but ultimately we'll have to wait and see. I did enjoy this one more than a lot of the previous ones. Maybe it is the darker approach because I did grow up with the Daniel Craig ones. Ultimately we'll get to those movies when we get to them, but I do like the darker tone of the Timothy Dalton movies more than the campy, wholesome ones that Roger Moore did. So here's to the living daylights, you know? John Glenn, you fucking did one, you know? Good for you, man. But I went ahead and gave the living daylights 3.5 stars. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you next time.